What should my kid pack for college?
I don't know.
How much spending money?
I don't know.
What should we talk about?
I don't know.
So how can I be sure that my kid is keeping up with his classwork?
I don't know. What are we going to do if there are no in-person classes? I don't know.
College Ready 2020. A crash course preparing college parents for the road ahead. Hello, I'm Andrea McCarren, your host for College Ready 2020. The first year of college represents an enormous academic transition for incoming freshmen. Managing their college class load requires a rigor and intensity that most students have never experienced, and these demands only increase through their sophomore, junior, and senior years. In 2020, meeting the challenges of collegiate academic life has become especially difficult due to the effects of the coronavirus pandemic on traditional educational methods. However, there is good news. Research shows that parents can have a significant positive impact on their students' academic success, particularly when their students begin their collegiate studies. In this episode, we explore the role parents play in helping college students achieve academic success. To help us appreciate the complexity and nuances of the parent's role, we'll speak with Justin Inscoe.
My name is Justin Inscoe,
the Associate Director of New Student and Family Programs at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
I work with new students as well as their families to support their transition to campus and to work to communicate and provide engagement opportunities for families to stay informed and be involved.
And Kristin Austin.
My name is Kristin Austin,
the Senior Director of New Student Programs at Westchester University.
In my role, I oversee programs and initiatives that seek to transition new students and families to and through Westchester University.
To begin, we asked our guests to tell us what questions about academics they most frequently receive from parents.
A lot of the families that I interact with, they are asking questions about what general education requirements look like. What does registration and the process of registering for courses look like? What type of advising are students getting and are able to receive, not just now, but throughout their time at the university? What prerequisites are available and what class spaces look like so that they can get into particular majors or schools? They're asking about grades. How does grading work? How does the academic rigor differ from their early college or high school experience? And they're asking about how they can kind of monitor and view their students' performance when they're getting graded and managing these courses.
When it comes to academics, parents primarily inquire about the college or university's expectations for their students. In other words, they want to understand the school's benchmarks for success, which are certainly important for monitoring academic progress. But there are also some critical, unasked questions to be explored. Questions about how parents can provide academic support for their students and how reasonable a parent's expectations are for their students' academic achievements.
While they're asking questions about the classroom experience, what I think is underlying all of their questions is, are my expectations the reality? Because I think that parents and family members are really kind of thinking that they're going to have a similar high school experience, especially if they have not had college experience themselves. They're looking for that alignment between expectation and reality. And then certainly with the introduction of COVID, they're wanting to know what the academic experience will be like, whether remote or virtual or in person.
For parents who are college graduates, it's important to realize that college is a lot different today, and your memories of college, both positive and negative, may be shaping your expectations for your student. To help us level our expectations, our guests gave us some insight about the nature of today's college experience.
For many movies and the media, and maybe in someone's past, it was really up to you to be in the classroom. And I do believe it is still a very self-directed process of being a student in college. But for many of our classrooms, if not all of them, there is at least a standard attendance policy, if not one that goes beyond that is expected by the professor. So I think encouraging students to really show up, that might be a difference in experience. Another thing that comes up often is how students register. A lot of our families will talk about when they showed up to sign up for their academic course load. It's kind of a free-for-all in a large space, like a gymnasium, running with physical cards from place to place. And I did not experience that, but certainly what our students experience now is much more streamlined, but still pretty stressful, especially when there is a finite number of seats for a lot of courses that are needed to get you to the next space. Families knowing that is going to be a time where it's important for students to do the work, to think about their class schedule, to talk with their advisors, but also to leave their student alone a little bit. My assumption is a family member who went to college a number of years ago probably didn't have their family member at that physical location to help them register. So my recommendation would be to step away and let the student do that, which they're probably going to be doing from home via computer sometime soon for their fall semester.
Previous generations really viewed education for the common good. Education was a good thing because you could count on what was going to happen afterward. And by afterward, I mean long-term employment, successful retirement. Conversely, I think Gen Z is very skeptical of school, of institutional education. Now they view higher education as transactional. They see it very much as, because I'm paying to be here, I can curate my experience. That may include showing up or not showing up. I'm paying, so I can make the choice of what I'm going to do. I can look at the syllabus and decide how I'm going to move. I don't believe that Gen Z sees collegiate education, formal education, traditional education the same way that previous generations did, where I think there's a far less emphasis on doing things because it's societally right or it's for the common good versus this is a business transaction. So I'm going to walk in here, I'm going to pay my tuition, and then I'm going to get what I want in return.
For incoming freshmen, college is a more self-directed academic experience than high school, and this is also a big transition for parents. Our guests discuss ways they have seen parents make this transition.
One of the ways in which I've seen this play out is how a student may not be communicating with their family what they're experiencing in or outside of the classroom. Because families are unable to view grades or see a report card or hear a phone call from an instructor or teacher to kind of share what they're experiencing with their student, the family may have spent a lot of time with that kind of resource and expecting more communication from teachers and folks and their student. But now there's space there, not just proximity, but maybe in frequency and how often a student will actually speak with their family about what's going on. A family member can really be shook by that, I think. Families are used to a certain level of information being shared with them about how their student is doing. So they still expect that at the collegiate level. But the truth is, that's not what happens. Some of that's because it's the law. Families are not privy to these students' grades and performance. There's nothing that allows us to share that without some written permission from students, allowing their families to get that information. When I've received calls worrying about their students, I try to make sure I connect them appropriately to some of the resources that can support their students and how they can talk with their students about that. But we can't just give you the grades. And that can be a real growth and transition moment for families.
One of the biggest differences for the upcoming academic year is that due to the coronavirus pandemic, many students will not be returning to campus to continue their studies, but will be engaged in remote learning. Colleges and universities across the nation were forced to quickly develop remote learning systems when the pandemic hit in the early months of 2020. Our guests gave us some perspectives on the lessons learned from the spring semester, lessons which may give some insights into our students' experience in the fall.
I think that we are more aware of the inequities in access in higher education. If you are a low income family, you already know that you are. But I think when you're able to send a student off to college, there's somehow this thought that, oh my goodness, I've made it. We have struggled, but I now have a kid in college. But then when that kid had to come home and you were then faced with the reality of all that that student needed in order to continue their education, but you couldn't provide it, and the institution wasn't prepared to provide it, what we learned is that at any point you can be, quote unquote, knocked back down into an oppressive position. So I can't say that we learned about the inequities. I think that we became more aware of them. I think that they became very much more in front of our faces. Like, you can't just suddenly go remote. If you do, you will see how much students rely on the meal plans, the housing, the workout facilities, the counseling centers, the health centers. You will see how higher education really is life-sustaining for so many thousands and thousands of students. And this isn't something that parents don't know. It's something that we gave them a way to escape, but then kind of took that back.
We certainly learned a lot about how do we flip something to be a decent quality instructional product for our students. From a family's perspective, this may have also opened this idea and thought about, hey, if you can deliver this while my student's at home, how does this impact the cost of a college education and a college experience? And how can I and my student advocate for ourselves in terms of here is what we'd like to receive and here is what you're charging me for this? From a higher ed perspective, you have to kind of justify the product that you are providing at a similar cost here in the fall for a lot of students that might say, I don't feel comfortable coming to campus at this time. All of a sudden, being able to zoom into the intimacy of people's lives, you're getting to know more about where they come from, what their housing looks like, what technology they do or do not have. And in some ways, I think COVID-19 has been an accelerant, has shifted us down the road several years to think about what it is we do in higher ed and a lot of other fields. There's a lot for us to consider and reflect on the past 3 or 4 months. But I think we're still learning about both the opportunities that are present, but also some of the threats and areas that we need to be watchful for to help best support our students. I'm very proud of a lot of the work faculty and staff and our student affairs colleagues across the nation did to do what they could to advocate for students that are having hardships right now, to provide a learning experience where there was flexibility, because our students did not sign up for this experience. It's a wild time, and it goes well beyond just the academic components.
Managing parental expectations about grades is especially challenging. Approaches to grading have changed through the years, and parents need to adjust their expectations based on the evaluation methods used by their student's school.
When I get that alarming, I thought I could see the grades. What? I use that as a great opportunity to redirect them. Well, is it the progress you're looking for? Is it the individual grade you're looking for? Because a lot of times it's progress that they're looking for. The grades do matter, but when I can redirect them to progress and paint a bigger picture that in college, it's not just grades, it's also attendance, and grades are calculated in different ways. There are group projects, there are papers, there are in-class activities. So really helping them understand what the full class looks like. And of course, some things just legally cannot be shared. If they're asking for information that legally cannot be shared, what I help them do is phrase questions to their student, questions that will allow their student to provide them with information. I also manage their expectations up front in saying, your student may not want to give you this information. So let's talk about how that might feel if that is the case. And what will you do? How will you respond if your student doesn't take a bite at the bait? Because they may not. So here are some really pro-social and relationship-oriented ways to craft the conversation, but we also have to manage the expectation that we still may not get what we're looking for. The response there to the, I need to see the grades, for me is a combination of, let's talk about what grades really mean, that big picture, progress over individual grades, forest over trees, But then let's also make sure that we're really pushing a healthy relationship, a healthy communicative relationship between the parent and the student.
Clearly, open communication is the key to a successful collegiate transition for both students and parents. We asked our guests to tell us what specific topics parents should be discussing with their students when it comes to academics.
One of the things that I've come across with a lot of our families and our students is, you can't throw a stick without hitting another valedictorian in the room. Most folks that are attending, at least in my experience here, they're talented students and they deserve to be there. They've put in a lot of effort and they're extremely talented. But what that means a lot is they maybe traditionally haven't had a situation where they were in need of help. They are typically the student that maybe breezed through some of their previous experiences and were able to manage a lot of what they did pretty easily in high school or even in an early college setting. For families, they're used to their students succeeding and doing well and not experiencing the tragedy of a B or a B plus. What we talk about often with families and with students is to communicate and ask for help. A lot of times students maybe haven't had the opportunity to seek out resources and seek out help. They don't classify themselves as the folks who need that. Coming in with some humility and using those resources early can be such a huge help in starting out on the right foot and getting that GPA where they want it to be out the gate, as opposed to trying to repair something later. And one of the things that maybe students don't experience before coming to college is really having some close relationships with the folks who are doing the instruction, faculty, TAs, lecturers, researchers. These folks, they create their office hours for a reason, for a purpose, and students should be making the time to visit them, request that time, and thank them for that time to help them gain a better understanding of the concepts. That is by far one of the best ways I think a student can really make an impact in the classroom, can be known and supported by the faculty, and really stand out academically.
I always encourage families to talk to their students about study habits and time management. First, I like to break down the fact that time management is really a misnomer. You can't manage time. It can't be managed, but you can manage your behavior. So I encourage students and families to talk about that idea of behavior management. If you at least set some sort of plan or boundary that will help students stick to their tasks that they need in order to be successful. It is very, very important for parents to encourage their students to make themselves known to their faculty, to their advisors, to their academic support colleagues. Whoever is in that toolbox of the academic journey, it's definitely important for parents to encourage that interaction. For a lot of students, especially Gen Z, they are not used to initiating and sustaining relationships outside of social media. But I think college presents a challenge for that because that is not the typical way that they'll maintain relationships with those that are in place to support them academically. They will have to go to office hours, whether those are physical or virtual. They will have to build those relationships.
It doesn't matter whether your student is an incoming freshman or a graduating senior, and it doesn't matter whether they'll be taking classes from their bedroom at home or you'll be driving them hundreds of miles away. Before classes begin this year, you need to speak to your student about money.
It is hard for parents to talk to their kids about personal finance, but you have to do it. It is critical.
That's Jamie Gayton, Executive Vice President of the Pentagon Federal Credit Union, PenFed, who served for 30 years in the U.S. Army after graduating from West Point. He's the author of the Guide to Personal Financial Planning for the Armed Forces and has taught financial literacy courses for the cadets at West Point, family readiness groups throughout the Army, and a variety of other groups and community organizations. Jamie is also the father of 2 teenagers and a young adult. For this episode of College Ready Money Moments, we get Jamie's guidance on payment of the college bill itself.
Critical, important question. How do you pay for college? The bill is going to go to your son or daughter in most circumstances. And sometimes it's available online. And so if there's dual access, you can see it there. But the reality is the true bill goes to your son or daughter because they're the ones consuming the college education. You have to have a transparent discussion with them ahead of time that when that bill comes, it's shared with the parents. hey, these kind of bills are critically important. If we don't pay our bills on time, that can reflect on us very poorly. It can have an impact on our credit score, which can really have an impact on you in the long run and us in the long run. So bills need to be shared between the family to make sure that we can pay the bills on time and pay them in the appropriate way. Now, who should actually make the payments? We can argue back and forth. There's some circumstance where you'd say, I want my son or daughter to have the independence to be able to have the money transferred into their account and they make the payments as appropriate. Or you can determine that it makes more sense for you to make the payments because you can do it on a schedule that makes sense for the family. Part of this money may be scholarship money, part of it may be grant money, and part of it may be coming out of a college fund, but there's another part of it that you may be paying directly. And so that conversation is critically important to understand who's responsible for those parts of the bill and then who's going to pay the bill.
PenFed Credit Union serves over 2 million members worldwide, offering market-leading certificates, checking, credit cards, personal loans, mortgages, auto loans, and student loans, with members' interests always in mind. For more information concerning the personal financial challenges faced by college students, please visit PenFed at penfed.org.
Colleges and universities have significant resources available to students who need help with their studies. Parents should encourage their students to be proactive and reach out for additional academic support, not just when they're struggling with their coursework, but as a regular practice to ensure their academic success.
I think it's important for families who maybe their student is someone who's needed some extra support from mentors, guidance counselors themselves, coaches, tutors. They'll have a really good frame of reference when it comes to knowing that they can work on mastering the material and learning material, as opposed to just getting enough just to perform well on a test. So I think those families can sit down together and look at their university's website. They look at different learning centers, writing centers, remote or in-person academic coaching opportunities, just so that they can go ahead and identify who these support people are and maybe meet and create that network early. Families who have students that have usually had it together, so to speak, that haven't needed a lot of that help in the past can do the same exact thing. And of course, their student may not receive that well or may not know how to receive that if they haven't had to ask for help. But I think it's an important conversation. It's important to think about knowing who your support is and utilizing those folks early before they're actually needed. It might be that this is just important to know these resources and use them as guideposts to make sure you're on track, as opposed to saying, wow, I'm 3 months in, I've taken 2 midterms, my final's approaching, and I'm in a bad place. I'm not approaching wrapping up this semester from a place of strength. I'd rather be on the end of I'm already engaging with these folks and I'm just on the right track. I think a couple kind of maybe higher level conversations families can have with their students is about how they viewed grades and performance in the past. My assumption is for a lot of folks, it might be just a marathon between K through 12 of all the grades, all the extracurriculars, all the work one has to do to get into a place that they would like to explore their college experience. That work doesn't end. And now they're in a place where they're kind of in a scaffolded development opportunity where their parents and families aren't necessarily seeing them every day and pushing them and motivating them to do the work. The students will have to kind of think about how they go about monitoring their performance, that if they get a less than stellar grade, how are they not only knowing who to go get help from, but how they can maybe describe that experience. Are they looking at it and saying, this is a one-time grade. Doesn't mean that I'm not smart or not talented. Where did I kind of mess up? How can I get feedback from my professor, from folks around me who maybe do group projects with? And then how can I use that to improve my performance for next time? So I think kind of coaching their students and thinking about how they describe adversity, how they view getting poor grades, and how they get back on the horse, if you will, and come back from that and show some resilience. And having that growth mindset can really be a benefit as they approach all of their academic work and probably a lot of other challenges at college and throughout life.
A college education goes far beyond what happens in the classroom and at the library. And a student's extracurricular activities are just as important to their future success as their academic coursework. We asked our guests to discuss the proper balance between academics and extracurricular activities.
I see social involvement on campus as being co-curricular. I see it as being equally important to a student's success as is the academic experience. So that's why I stress co-curricular, that the two are in tandem, working together. All of the data and research shows that students that do the best overall in terms of academics and in terms of their graduation rates are also connected to some co-curricular engagement opportunities. Of course, balance is important. Balance is incredibly important. So I wouldn't want a student to come and think they're majoring in the marching band or majoring in fraternity and sorority life or majoring in intramural sports. Those aren't majors. So it is definitely important to remind students and families that while it is important to have a co-curricular experience, there's only one experience that's going to actually get you your degree. So balance is so important, but I do really like to empower our field of student affairs and making sure that people understand the legitimacy and the incredible role that co-curricular experiences play as it relates to graduation.
I think it does give a lot of legitimacy and importance to what do you do outside the classroom to further round out how you think critically, how you problem solve, how you work with other people, how you connect with the community in which you live, you learn, you research. Hopefully those folks are very different from yourself. So I would always forgo having the 4.0 to take the 3.6 and have these other experiences. And that's a challenge for students. And I think a family member can really lean in on that too and help push, how do you manage yourself? How do you find that balance that Kristin mentioned? I love that photo. It's been around for a while, but it's like a triangle. And each tip of the triangle says like academics, social life, and the last point says sleep. And it says, okay, student, pick two. Because it's always going to be a bit of a balance, I think, as folks manage their self, their time, and their priorities. But I also think that there are times where when students are having a hard time with mental wellness or things are happening at home that are bothering them, or there's a relationship concern, or maybe a really traumatic event has happened in their life that they're struggling. It's impacting them overall. A lot of times, and not to say that a professor or a teacher can't be this person for a student, but I've had plenty of students who work with us in groups that I've advised that have said, hey, I'm really struggling, and how can I go about getting help? I believe that when a student is involved, there are so many touch points for support. They're building relationships with a faculty, a staff, a person, an advisor who has a culture of care that they're creating. That when a student's not doing well, they can help them get the support they need so they can get the good grades. They can get to that end point to graduation. Sometimes it's not about the grade, it's about doing well and trying, but also having that involvement.
The reality is that college is a very self-directed experience for students, and parents often have a limited understanding of what their students are doing and how they're progressing. This is clearly difficult for parents who need to be reassured with the knowledge that their kids are doing well, or at least keeping up academically. So how can parents know if their children are achieving their potential, or if they're in academic trouble?
For a lot of families, when they start sensing some sort of regression, it typically means there might be some warning signs or signals there. It's important to establish what communication looks like for you and your student. You got to talk about these things. A lot of times I think students are caught up in comparison and how do I do well? Am I good enough? Sometimes imposter syndrome. It's because they're not